And
Hi. Hi, Dr. Adriana.
how's it going, Vinny?
I'm good. And here we are starting one more Ask Dr. Adriana, and we're going to talk about anxiety, like how to get free of anxiety. And you have some tools and stories for us, right, Adriana?
Yes. Anxiety is a big topic in the work that I do as a psychologist, as a coach, as a person living on this planet. Seems like anxiety is all around us all the time. And most people have no idea how to cope with it. Most people, I think, feel powerless and plagued by anxiety. They don't understand it. They don't understand where it's coming from. And they certainly don't understand how to change it. So that's kind of why I'm doing this, series in general, is to educate people on different issues that I see a lot and to really empower people to know that you can change anything in your life that isn't working for you, including anxiety. So I want to talk a little bit first about how anxiety gets created. It gets created by our mind. It gets typically created by our thoughts, the stuff we're thinking about and how we're thinking about it. So for example, somebody who has of what we call in cognitive behavioral therapy, a thought distortion, they might have a thought distortion like catastrophizing, where they're always thinking about the future, something that's about to happen or will happen, some event or something, and imagining the worst case scenario about it. It's going to be horrible. I have to fly on a plane. The plane is going to crash, things like that. And when you think things like that, it then creates a certain feeling. It creates a feeling of fear. Anxiety is fear. It's the fear of not being in control. It's the fear of losing control and having something terrible happen. So when you're thinking that way, you're creating a feeling of fear, and then you're creating a corresponding sensation in your body. Your heart will start racing, your pupils will dilate, your blood pressure rises. You're basically activating the fight, flight, freeze response. And that's a big part, I think, of the science that we now understand, because we can look at people's brains, and science is, progressed with its understanding of how these things work. But anxiety is a big thing happening in your brain. You're activating the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional center of your brain. It's what's deciding whether or not you're in actual danger. And if the amygdala determines that you are in actual danger, you're under threat of something like a predator or something dangerous for real is about to happen, then it activates this survival mechanism called fight, flight, or freeze. All of this is run by a very primitive part of our brain, right? Our brain really over time as humans has evolved into three parts, if you will. We have our most primitive reptilian brain, which is in the brainstem at the back of the head. So we share some brain anatomy with lizards and reptiles and snakes. And then as we evolved into mammals, we developed the midbrain, and that's where the amygdala is housed, and hippocampus and all of these other parts of the brain that are involved in memory, emotion, different things like that. And then most recently developed is this part, the prefrontal cortex. Okay, that's the human part of our brain that allows me to be talking to you right now with language. It's what allows us to do math, to do abstract reasoning, things like that. And so you're thinking with your prefrontal cortex, right? You're thinking about all those terrible things that are going to happen. And then when you do that, you're activating the more primitive part of your brain, and it essentially hijacks your brain and takes over. When people are in a full-blown panic, like fight, flight, freeze response, this part of your brain goes offline. You can't think straight anymore. You forget. This is when like the person who has to give a speech in public like gets up and forgets everything they were about to say, right? They lose access to this part of their brain because they're so nervous, they're so scared of whatever, making a fool of themselves, being judged, whatever it is that people are thinking is going or imagining is going to happen. As soon as that primitive part of your brain takes over, a whole cascade of biochemical responses happens. You get a whole bunch of stress hormones going, like adrenaline and cortisol. You get 70% of the blood flow going out of your prefrontal cortex, which is why it goes offline. The blood flow goes to your extremities, right? It's going to your hands and your feet to activate either a fight or a run, a flight, response. Now, if neither one of those is available, you might resort to the most primitive response, which is the one that reptiles do, which is freeze. If you ever see a scared lizard, it freezes. It doesn't run, it doesn't fight, mostly it just plays dead and hopes that the predator will leave it alone. So we also have that freeze response, which for people can look like a paralysis, could look like dissociation, like when you check out of your body, things like that. So this is the phenomenon of anxiety. Those of us, I will say that's predominantly how it starts, but those of us that are, highly sensitive, which is a lot of us, highly sensitive empathic types also can pick up anxiety from people around us, right? Like if you ever, again, I just flew to a conference and back. So I was in an airport, on an airplane, and I could sense the anxiety of a lot of people. A lot of people have a fear of flying. They still think that plane is going to crash or something's going to happen. And so when I'm on the plane, I can sense that anxiety from other people, and my body is giving me information about that. We have mirror neurons, which have more recently been discovered, where whatever you're feeling, I can sense it too. So like, for example, it's the phenomenon of if you yawn, I then feel like yawning. If you smile, I feel like smiling. If you're crying, I cry. There's actually a science behind all that now to explain how that works. So we are also picking up on anxiety from others and misidentifying it as our own. And the thing about that's problematic is that if you're picking up anxiety from someone else and you assume it's yours, oh, I'm so anxious, then your mind has to make up a story about why you're anxious. Well, maybe I'm anxious because I'm worried about that upcoming job interview I have. And I'm really thinking it, and then you'll start spinning with that, right? And then you'll start creating a whole story around how you're anxious about the upcoming job interview, which may have never been true for you in the first place, all right? So one of the tools that I think is most useful, that comes from Access Consciousness in terms of dealing with anxiety is the question, who does this belong to? What is this? Who does this belong to? Is this even mine? And then you get a sense for that, you get an intuitive sense. And even if you don't, what you can do is just send that energy back to whoever it came from. It's called return to sender. It's the second part of who does this belong to? Return to sender, whatever is not mine. It's not an effortful thing. It's just like telling the energy to go back to wherever it came from. A lot of times that will alleviate the anxiety. If it doesn't, then I might go to some energy psychology tools, or I might do some breathing. Okay, one of the things we know now, again, from the science, is that we can calm that amygdala. We can send a deactivating signal to the amygdala to get the body out of that fight, flight, freeze response. And one way that we do it is through polyvagal, through the polyvagal theory, through activating the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve runs from our brain. It's connected with, the amygdala and the thalamus and, all the parts of our brain that are processing input. And then it connects to every organ in your body. So it's really involved in this sympathetic nervous system activation or a parasympathetic nervous system calming. Okay, so it's really involved in that feeling of safety. So one of the things we want to do if we've been activated with anxiety is we want to calm that fear, and we want to get to a sense so that our bodies have a sense of safety. And we can do that through breathing techniques. We can do that through tapping or EFT. And we can do that through a whole bunch of other energy medicine, energy psychology techniques. There's a great resource that Vinny, maybe we can put in the comments about resources for resilience. I was just at the annual Energy Psychology Conference in New Mexico, and ASAP, the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, their website is energypsych.org. On that website, there is a resources for resilience, which is basically emotional first aid tools, right? It's different breathing techniques. It's different things you can do with your body. Like, for example, this one is called havening, right? It's very soothing. It's what we do to babies when they're upset and small children. There are things we can do with our bodies that activate that calming response. And I believe the direct page for it is r.org. the letter R, the number 4, R.support. Or you can find it through the ASAP website. But my usual go-tos are breathing techniques and tapping. So with breathing techniques, you're going to do, for example, a 4 square breath. It's also known as box breathing. So you breathe in for the count of 4, hold your breath for the count of 4, exhale for 4, and once again, hold your breath for 4. When you're slowing down the whole breathing process and you're lengthening the exhale, that's the key piece. You're holding your breath and you're also lengthening the exhale. It gets that vagus nerve activated and gets the nervous system to start calming down. It's remarkably effective. I suggest people do 5 to 10 of those breaths when they are feeling anxious, and they will have a calming effect. They will have that, their brain and their body will start to come out of that panic, fight, flight, freeze response. There's another type of breath called 4-7-8, where you breathe in for 4, hold your breath for 7, breathe out for 8. And again, I would do 5 to 10 of those. There's alternate nostril breathing that comes from yoga. There's a lot of different breathing techniques. Experiment with them and find one that works for you. I think on my YouTube, we also put some links to some breathing techniques. I did some videos on that. So if you want to know more about those, we can put a link in there as well. So that's breathing. That's a really quick way. And nobody has to know you're doing it. You know, you could be in a crowd, you could be in a meeting, and you could be doing that and nobody knows. And you could easily get yourself calmed down in a very short period of time. The other method I use a lot, especially with my clients who've had a lot of trauma, because people who've had a lot of trauma, they often get stuck in this fight, flight, freeze response. They get stuck in the fight, flight part, or they get stuck in the freeze part, on or off. They're either super anxious and hypervigilant and always like looking for danger, or they're shut down in that dissociative response, in the freeze response, where they're kind of checked out. They're not even present in their bodies, you know, that type of thing. So I find tapping, EFT, emotional freedom techniques, it's been around, it comes from TFT, thought field therapy. And I've talked a lot about this on my podcast. I've had a number of folks from the energy psychology world, Dawson Church, Suzanne Connolly, Mary Seiss. They're all what I call the OGs of energy psychology, or now I guess we call them the goats, OGs or goats. They've been around, you know, for years, since ASAP started back in the late 90s. And these techniques have been around even longer. Tapping's been around since the 70s. Dr. Roger Callahan came up with it. He brought traditional Chinese medicine, the principles of acupuncture and working with those energy pathways in the body. And he applied them to psychology, particularly to working with anxiety disorders, phobias, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and a number of other conditions that are anxiety connected. And he got really good results. And instead of using needles on acupuncture points, he would have people tap on them. And that tapping, what we now know, not only does it balance the energy flows in the body, which get wonky when you're anxious, but it also sends a deactivating signal, an electrical signal that travels through the fascia, which is the connective tissue that surrounds all of your muscles and bones and everything. Tapping or using needles or whatever, stimulating those acupuncture points sends a signal up to the amygdala and tells it to calm down, tells it that basically we're safe, it's okay to relax, and it's okay to release this anxiety. And so if you were going to do the very simplest, you know, form of tapping with no words, you can do it with words or without. You would start by tapping on the side of the hand, either hand, it doesn't matter. You could also do this if you want both. Okay. And then you go to the inside of the eyebrow, where the eyebrow meets the kind of the bridge of the nose. And again, you can do one hand, you know, or two hands, it doesn't matter. Then you go to the side of the eye, right, where the kind of pointy part ends right there. It's like there's a groove right there in the bone, right? Just that your finger fits in. And then under the eye is right under the pupil, right there on the eye bone. And then then you go here under the nose, right? And then you go on the chin, right in this cleft part here, right under the lip. under the collarbone is not on the collarbone. It's actually below it, between the collarbone and the rib below it. There's like a little space in there between those two bones, and your fingers can fit in there. You go a couple inches out from the sternal notch here. Under the arm is from your armpit. It's on the bra strap line. It's really in line with the nipple. Okay, and then the top of the head. There are obviously many other acupuncture points on the body. And so you might, if you were going to go on YouTube and watch some tapping videos, you might see people using fingertip points. You might see people using some liver points, some neurolymphatic points, points on the legs. I mean, you know, these points are all over your body. The meridians run all the way through your body. So there are many different variations on tapping, but that's the most simple version. And I find that doing several rounds of that can be super helpful. Okay. So that's a lot of information. Any questions that you might have or that anyone watching might have, Vinny?
I had a question at the beginning about when I read in the past, like psychology books and self-development books, I came in contact with a term that's called backwards rationalization. And do you know what that is? Like
backwards rationalization?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of it?
I have not heard of that. No, what is that?
From what I understood, it's what we do when we have to rationalize something that's already happened. So when you were talking about the who does this belong to, in a situation when we are like having an anxiety and we have to tell us a story about that, like about that does not belong to us, it's from someone else's, we would do like backwards rationalization. And yeah. I was going to ask you, like, if we really buy something as ours, or okay, I'm sorry, Portuguese is coming in. If we buy something as ours and we really convince ourselves like that is what's happening, like how can we change that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we have to question it for sure. We can convince ourselves of anything, right? We can make up all kinds of stories. You know, people have developed delusions and people develop paranoia, right? Like the extreme versions of this are people think they're being followed. People think they're being poisoned. The TV is talking to them, you know, all kinds of like strange ideas that we'll invent in our mind. So I would, with that kind of stuff, like come back to question. There's always a question you can ask. What is this? Is this real or is this an invention, right? Am I aware of something or am I inventing something? What is this? What do I do with it? Can I change it? How do I change it? All these questions are really designed to get you in touch with your intuitive knowing. Your knowing doesn't come from your mind. You know, your knowing comes from you as a being, what you might call your soul, your spirit. I call it your infinite being. Your mind is really more like a tool. Your brain, your mind, like that stuff, it's all programs. It's all what you've learned in your life. It's all like the program of language. You learned Portuguese as your first language. I learned Romanian as my first language. Now we're both speaking English, right? All of that is learned. The mind only knows what it's been taught. Your knowing is far greater than that. Your knowing is your intuitive, instinctive, your wise mind, if we were talking DBT terms, like is far different. So I would say moving out of thinking and into knowing and intuiting is going to be a lot more effective at getting clarity around what's really going on. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how it comes up for me.
Antonieta is sending you the best regards and thanking us for the tapping exercise.
You're welcome.
And
yeah.
Talking about the tapping exercise, like what would be like a sequence that we can use to alleviate anxiety? Just the tapping is enough? Like I know that EFT, we have to say some words too with the tapping. How does that work?
Yeah, so let's, I mean, I can do a little demo with words. Like I said, remember, you can just do the tapping itself and that will suffice. But we can also do a verbal version of it. So if you're watching right now, think of a situation. Don't pick your deepest, darkest trauma. Just think of a situation that that is creating some anxiety for you. Something, usually it's future oriented. It could be something that's happened in the past that you're still head tripping on and like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But mostly anxiety is future oriented. It's worry about something that hasn't yet happened, and you think it's going to be bad. So think of a situation and then just check in with yourself. Notice what it's like when you think about that thing. What happens in your body? You know, most people are going to feel like a tightening in the throat, or, you know, their heart racing, or maybe there's like butterflies in the belly, something like that. There'll be some sort of physical sensation. So get a sense for what that is. Get a sense for what you're thinking about that situation. Like, why are you anxious about it? What are you worried is going to happen? The question that I often ask people is, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And oftentimes people can't even tell me what that is. They don't even know. So like, what's the worst thing you're imagining is going to happen? And what's the emotion connected to that? I mean, usually it's going to be fear, you know, maybe some other things, but get a sense for all those things. And then that becomes what we're going to tap on. Okay. And then you always want to, when you're using EFT, give all the intensity of it a rating, like not for when something happened, but like in this moment, when you're thinking about that situation or that thing you're worried about, how intense is all the physical sensation, the thoughts, the emotions, all that stuff on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is the most intense. How intense is that right now? Okay. And you get a sense for that. And then we start tapping. Okay. And it's going to sound something like this, and you can repeat after me if you're, you know, following along. So you start tapping on the side of the hand. Okay. And you say, even though I have this anxiety, I love and accept myself anyway. Now, if you can't, you know, if that's a statement that doesn't really feel like you can resonate with it, a lot of people don't love and accept themselves. You might say something different, but it's like, even though I'm worried about this thing, I accept myself anyway. Or even though I'm worried about this thing, I choose to start to let it go now. Okay. You're pairing the negative stressor with a positive affirmation. And you do that 3 times. Okay. And then we start tapping on the point for all the different aspects of the anxiety. So we would start on the inside eyebrow, and we might start with just this anxiety. And then we go to the side of the eye, all the places I feel it in my body. And then we go to under the eye, and you might think about those specific places. You know, my chest is tight. I have the butterflies in my stomach. I'm worried about something bad happening. I'm worried people are going to judge me for whatever, you know, all those things that you have anxiety about. I'm worried I'm going to make a fool of myself. All the thoughts, you tap on those, right? And then you tap on the fear and the worry and the anxiety, and you just keep going through the points, tapping on all the different aspects. And what you might find is that as you peel away like the top layers, more stuff comes up. Oh, this is reminding me of the last time this happened, and I'm still upset about that. And so you might need to do some tapping on that. It's reminding me of when I was a kid and maybe something traumatic happened, right? And so then we might tap for all of that. But the idea is you want to keep tapping, because it's getting that nervous system calmed down until the stress level gets as low as it possibly can. It may not get to a 0, but you might get from a 6 or 7 to a 4. And that would be an improvement, right? That might get this part of your brain back online. And then you can kind of use your logic and your reason, like, okay, well, what are the odds that the plane is going to crash? Really? You know, thousands of planes take off every day and do not crash. You know, you can then start tapping into, or, you know, it's like a job interview, and I've been successful at getting other jobs. I will do fine on this one too, right? Like you can start using other tools and you know, using your awareness in ways to actually work for you rather than against you. So that's how I would do the tapping. And if at first your number goes up, that's okay. It just means more material is coming up for you to tap on, because the very act of doing this sometimes brings up more stuff. It gives you access to things that you've been suppressing or repressing, which is also probably part of what's creating the anxiety. It might be stuff you've just like avoided dealing with, and finally you're being present with it. So it's all, the floodgates are going to open and it's all going to kind of come out at once. Does that make sense?
That's amazing, Adriana. It's almost like I can perceive myself like taking care of me. Like, that's a tool for that. It's definitely soothing.
It is emotional self-care. It really is. And the term I was hearing a lot at the conference was emotional hygiene, or emotional self-regulation, or emotional first aid. And what I love about those resources for resilience is that they've been translated into a bunch of languages, and they just got them translated into Ukrainian and Russian. So I think that's really wonderful for our friends who are, in those places really dealing with some very traumatic and frightening things. There are tools out there to deal with the more immediate, fight, flight, fear response. And then later on, when things settle down and those people have the trauma that they've been through, then tapping can also be a very useful tool for processing trauma, really allowing us to release all that trauma energy at a very deep level. That's really the profound, we're talking about tapping in the moment to turn down stress and anxiety, but the other possibilities for things like tapping is remarkable, profound healing. So I love this tool. I think it's a really great tool. I have a couple of how-to videos with tapping and breathing on the YouTube channel, so people can find out more there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adriana. That was awesome.
Thanks, everyone. Tune in next time.